I am Emmanuel Manu, Senior Lecturer in Quantity Surveying and Project Management at Nottingham Trent University. For this keynote presentation, I've titled it, Transitioning from a linear to a circular construction supply chain. In the next 10 to 15 minutes, I'll be going over some of the resource consumption issues in construction that make it necessary to transition towards a circular economy, some of the circular business models that can be adopted, and some of the critical success factors for transitioning the supply chain towards the circular economy. In terms of resource consumption, the construction sector currently consumes a substantial amount of resources, most of which are from natural sources, so our raw materials are sand, aggregates, and so on and so forth. And secondly, a lot of the resources that we use that go into our buildings, into our infrastructure and other built assets tend to degenerate into waste at the end of life of these assets. And it's estimated that in the EU alone, 25 to 30% of the waste generated in the EU is from construction, excavation, and demolition waste. And so it is very, very important that the construction sector moves from the predominant model that we use to produce buildings, which is based on a linear economy model, and towards the circular economy model. And it has also been estimated that this transition could yield global productivity savings within the construction sector of about $100 billion a year. This was estimated by during the World Economic Forum in 2016. So what is the linear economy then? The linear economy is based on a take, make, and dispose model of production, where materials and resources that we use, say in our projects and built assets, would lose value over time and degenerate into waste. We are all familiar with that. And whilst there have been regulations that have diverted a lot of the waste from landfill, landfill tax and the like, a lot of these still end up as less valuable materials, or sometimes materials that are having to be incinerated to generate energy from the waste. Okay. The circular economy, on the other hand, is an alternative sustainable economic paradigm which seeks for materials to be kept constantly as useful resources, useful and valuable resources over time. And these can be achieved, this constant utilization of materials by giving them, or adding value to them, can be achieved through, reuse, recycling, repurposing buildings, remanufacturing, and things like that, maintenance. So some of these are things that we already do very well in the industry, but there are also opportunities for a whole lot of other business models that can revolutionize the circular economy within construction. So how can we achieve such a transition? It's very important that, in any effort to transition towards the circular economy, we drive that through the supply chains that typically are the lifeblood of the construction sector. And so supply chains that operate in the industry can begin to adopt more circular business models. Again, when I use the term business models here, this is just the logic that underpins how organizations would identify, capture, and then deliver value to clients. So supply chains that adopt circular economy business models, I would call here, circular supply chains. And so how can we transition our supply chains from linear to circular supply chains, since they predominantly operate based on a linear model at the moment? Okay. And so there have been different typologies of circular business models, and in my own presentation here, I've classified these different typologies into several of them, with circular design being, firms that have specialized in designing for circular economy, designing circular buildings, circular infrastructure because they have the expertise to do so, or designing products that drive the circular economy, products that are easier to disassemble at the end of life of buildings. So we are looking at firms with expertise in, say, design for disassembly or design for adaptability, design for demountability, and things like that. Circular construction business models, again, this would be for firms that want to package themselves and specialize in, constructing or assembling built assets for the circular economy. Um, the products as service concept again is based on firms specializing in selling the performance of their product rather than selling the products themselves. And so, an example is the Philips paper locks model that has been experimented with in Holland. But again, you can have things like boilers being sold for their performance, so that the company still retains ownership of these, and people pay a reasonable amount for the service. Again, sharing platforms just facilitate, or these are firms that provide platforms to facilitate sharing of idle materials, idle equipment, idle plants, materials that are not needed and stuff like that. There are examples like the Flow2 platform, and there are other platforms like Enviromate platforms, and there's the need for more platforms like this that would facilitate, sharing of things that are more specific to the construction sector. Life cycle extension business models are ones that are more akin to what we do in construction, in terms of firms that specialize in maintaining built assets, extending their life by repurposing them, or remanufacturing different components and buildings for them to be reused and stuff like that, but just to prolong and increase the utilization of built assets and whatever is in them. The circular material production and supply involves firms that specialize in recovering things from buildings at their end of life, and then recycling or upcycling these and supplying them back for use in buildings. Okay, the last business model, which some have argued is not actually circular because it ultimately leads to the materials being destroyed, is the energy recovery, where materials are incinerated to recover energy from them. Okay, so these are some of the business models, the circular business models that kind of span the life cycle of a project from design to the end of life. In the next 10 to 15 minutes, I'll be going over some of the resource consumption issues in construction that make it necessary to transition towards a circular economy, some of the circular business models that can be adopted, and some of the critical success factors for transitioning the supply chain towards the circular economy. Now, how can we get more and more firms to begin to operate some of these business models that are more circular in nature? And we carried out a study last year in France. Predominantly, most of the firms were from France, and 3 of them in the UK, but in total we spoke to 14 participants. All these firms were firms that had adopted the circular economy and embedded principles within their business, and were operating as such. So we wanted to just understand what are some of the issues, the critical success factors, and like. And just to give a summary of some of our findings, one of the issues that was raised quite a lot was that there was still a need for more maturity in the market on the demand side, in terms of that critical mass of demand for circular products that would really get the transition moving. That is quite interesting because again that presents opportunities at the moment, since there are still things are still at the early stages. It presents a lot of opportunities for firms that would be innovative enough to kind of drive that transition as more and more awareness grows amongst construction clients of trying to experiment with circular buildings and trying to incorporate some of these requirements in their project. And so it may be more rewarding for firms that are going to be early movers in terms of trying to adopt circular business models within their organizations. Although it would come with its own risk. Firms that produce new products like these interlocking brakes that I'm showing here, which are easier to dismantle. And some of the other critical factors were, the need for mindset changes and the way we even communicate about products that have been, produced from waste, and the fact that these are eco products that have to be stringently tested for their performance and especially in a post-Grenfell world, to make sure that these meet very stringent performance requirements. And so why shouldn't they be valued as eco products in their own right? Um, this was one of the key factors that a lot of the participants raised, which is the need to minimize the cost of secondary production. And one of the ways that a lot of them have started to achieve this was the creation of shorter material flow loops just to minimize the logistics costs, bearing in mind that there are going to be costs of hauling materials from different sites, say to a recycling facility, storing them, reprocessing them, supplying them back again. And so even incentives like tax breaks and carbon credits and economic incentives policy-wise that can minimize the cost of secondary production are going to be helpful, because these materials are going to be competing with regular materials from virgin sources. Realizing an industry shift where we are able to design more for deconstruction is also going to be key as a critical success factor, all because it facilitates that end of life aspect of buildings where we can easily recover materials and resources from buildings at the end of life. And so even things that are already happening in terms of material passports to facilitate those end of life decisions are all going to be key to realizing this transition. Another key issue was the need for collaboration amongst industry stakeholders, and those stakeholders are very wide-ranging in terms of planning authorities, major clients, insurers of materials, and those agencies that are going to test and certify these materials and stuff like that. The deconstruction specialists, there's the need for greater collaboration, and here, I mean. A lot of industry 4.0 innovations, like artificial intelligence and all these various digital tools can support some of this collaboration that is needed to arrive at a transition. There is need for industry leadership. Clients that are going to, push for more demonstration projects that kind of test the boundaries. Clients that would incorporate requirements into their tenders for, circular projects, circular infrastructure, and that trend is growing, and there is the need for more and more of that to drive the transition. There's the need for flexible regulations and standards that keep pace with circular innovations, because again, stringent regulations that ensure that materials, whether recovered from waste or have been produced newly as materials that are circular in nature, they have to meet very stringent performance requirements. But we need regulations that would keep pace with some of these innovations. There was also the concern that as the market for circular products and recycled products and upcycled products continues to grow and mature, there will be a need for firms that operate in this space to secure a lot more of these materials in commercial quantities for their own activities. And so that also presents an opportunity for leveraging on AI tools that can help predict material deposits and material flows at what times, especially in collaboration with planning agencies, local authorities, and the like. Supply chain firms that operate in the sector would also have to be flexible enough to adapt their existing processes whilst they innovate on the circular economy. So again, one of the firms involved in our study, they had to have a separate batching plant just for recycled aggregates. And so it shows that there has to be that willingness to also accept some risk as part of this transition. So based on the views that we got from our participants, these are some of the implications that we have summed up, although there are quite a lot more, but for the sake of time. So thank you very much for listening. In the next 10 to 15 minutes, I'll be going over some of the resource consumption issues in construction that make it necessary to transition towards a circular economy, some of the circular business models that can be adopted, and some of the critical success factors for transitioning the supply chain towards the circular economy.